I still remember the exact moment my heart cracked. We were sitting at the dinner table, me, my mom, and my sister, when I told them I wanted to apply to college. Nothing fancy, just a local university where I could study psychology. I'd rehearsed it a dozen times in my head, trying to sound confident. But the words barely left my mouth when my mom snorted into her glass of water. "College," she said, eyes wide with amusement. "You, Emily? Sweetheart, you're just not studying material." I blinked. Maybe I misheard. But she leaned back in her chair, waved her hand like she was dismissing a joke. "Let's be real. You're better off learning how to clean hotel rooms. There's no shame in that. It's honest work. Meanwhile, your sister will be a doctor. She already got early acceptance offers." My sister smiled smugly, not even pretending to be modest. I just sat there, staring at my plate like the ground had shifted beneath me. My cheeks burned, not just with embarrassment, but something else. Something that felt like betrayal. "I can handle the workload," I mumbled, trying to defend myself. "I've kept my grades up." Mom cut me off with a laugh. "Please, you barely got through algebra. You don't have the discipline, Emily. You're smart in your own way. Street smart. But books? They're not your thing." My sister added, "Don't take it so personally. You'll find something that suits your skill set." It wasn't just what they said, it was how casual it was. Like they'd already decided who I was, and nothing I said could change that. I pushed the food around on my plate while they chatted about which med school my sister should choose. They talked about scholarships, dorm tours, which color laptop she should get. I wasn't even in the conversation anymore. But in the middle of all that silence, something inside me woke up. I wasn't crying. I wasn't pleading. I was planning. I would not be the girl who cleaned hotel rooms just because someone decided that was all she was worth. I didn't know how. I didn't know when. But I knew one thing for sure. If no one was going to believe in me, I'd learn how to believe in myself. And someday I'd walk across a stage with a diploma in my hand, and they'd have no choice but to remember this night. The family dynamic had always been clear. Sophia was the golden child. From the moment she could walk, she was showered with praise and affection. Her achievements, no matter how small, were met with wide smiles, applause, and sometimes even gifts. Emily, on the other hand, had always been a bit of a shadow in the family. Despite being hardworking, responsible, and determined, her efforts seemed to go unnoticed. Sophia's life was a picture of perfection. She excelled academically, always scoring top grades, and she was an effortlessly beautiful young woman who seemed to glide through life. Her accomplishments were a constant source of pride for her parents. Every time Sophia entered the room, it was as if the sun itself followed her, illuminating her path. Emily often found herself sitting quietly at the dinner table, watching the admiration flow toward her sister, wondering if her own efforts would ever be enough to earn the same level of attention. Their mother, especially, never missed an opportunity to praise Sophia's brains and natural talent. "Sophia is going to be a doctor one day," their mom would say with a smile so wide it practically stretched across her face. "She's got the brains for it, and she's already starting to build a great future." Emily, on the other hand, was never the topic of such glowing praise. If she ever brought up her own achievements, they were always dismissed or minimized. "You're smart too, but Sophia's got something special," her mom would say, not even attempting to hide the favoritism. It wasn't just the words. It was the actions that spoke louder. While Sophia's tuition was fully paid, her textbooks bought without question, and her extracurricular activities funded without hesitation, Emily was left to fend for herself. She worked part-time jobs to make ends meet and struggled to balance her studies with the need to contribute to household expenses. It never seemed to matter how hard she worked. Her sister's needs always came first. It was the summer before Emily's senior year in high school when the final blow landed. They were sitting at the dinner table, the family gathered around, enjoying their evening meal. It was supposed to be a celebration. Emily had just received an acceptance letter from a prestigious college. The future felt promising. But instead of the congratulatory words she was hoping for, her mother's voice broke the silence with a sharp comment. "Emily, I've been thinking about your tuition," her mom said, her tone suddenly cold. "I don't think we can help you out this year." Emily froze, the weight of her mother's words sinking in. "What do you mean?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly. "You're smart," her mom said, not even glancing up from her plate. "You can figure it out. Go clean some hotel rooms or get a job, whatever. Your sister's the one we're focusing on now. She's going to be a doctor. You need to be more realistic about your future." Her heart sank. Every word felt like a slap to the face. She'd worked so hard to get here, to prove to her family that she could achieve something great too, and yet all they saw was her sister as the shining star. Emily was just not enough. Her father, who usually stayed quiet, only nodded in agreement. "Your mom's right," he muttered, not offering any other support. The message was clear. Sophia's future was set, while Emily's was something she'd have to figure out on her own. But something inside Emily snapped. She wouldn't accept this. She wouldn't let her mom's words define her. The anger and frustration began to bubble inside her. But it wasn't just anger, it was determination. She wasn't going to clean hotel rooms. She was going to prove them wrong. She was going to go to college, and no one would stop her. And so, with a mix of resentment and resolve, Emily started planning her future, one she would build entirely on her own. The path would be difficult, but it was hers to choose, and she would make sure her success would speak louder than the years of favoritism that had been handed to Sophia. This was only the beginning. Emily didn't lash out. She didn't argue or fight back. Instead, she chose silence, a silence that screamed louder than any words could. After her mother's cruel dismissal, she retreated into herself. There would be no dramatic confrontation, no tearful outbursts. She would prove herself without needing anyone's approval. Her days were long and exhausting, each hour filled with a new task to keep her moving forward. By day, she attended high school and kept her grades up, determined to finish strong despite the weight of her family's indifference. But as soon as school ended, her workday began. Emily took on multiple part-time jobs. She worked at a local cafe in the mornings, then shifted to a night shift at a hotel to clean rooms. Every night, after the hotel's last guest had checked out, she would mop the floors and scrub toilets, silent, repetitive tasks that felt like the very embodiment of the life her mother had prescribed for her. But Emily didn't care. This was her reality now, and she would make it work, no matter how small the steps or how difficult the journey. On the rare occasions when she had a moment to herself, she spent it tutoring local high school students, teaching them English or math. The money was minimal, but it helped. And every dollar she earned, every hour worked, was one step closer to her dream. The worst part was not the work itself. It was the loneliness that came with it. No one knew the full extent of her struggle. Not her friends, not even her boyfriend, Alex, who had become increasingly distant over the months. They saw her as the quiet, hardworking girl who had it together, who always put a smile on her face, but they didn't know how much she was sacrificing to make her dreams come true. Meanwhile, her sister's life was unfolding in a completely different way. Sophia had posted picture-perfect selfies from her college dorm. She seemed to be living a carefree life, surrounded by friends and new experiences. Her parents praised her constantly, calling her every week to hear about her classes, her friends, and how well she was doing. They were proud of her, and they showed it in every conversation. Emily couldn't help but feel the sting as she watched those posts flood her feed. But there was no time for self-pity. Emily kept pushing forward, working late into the night, making sure her grades never slipped. Every scholarship application she found, she submitted. Community college became her first step, her backup plan. She didn't expect anyone to help her. She couldn't afford to rely on anyone. She just had to do this on her own. In the quiet of the early mornings, after finishing her night shift at the hotel, Emily would sit in her tiny apartment and apply for scholarships. She had no time for distractions. She was careful about what she shared with people, not wanting anyone to know how much she was struggling. She didn't want their pity. She didn't want their concern. All she wanted was to prove her worth, to herself and to the people who'd never believed in her. Sophia's college life was everything Emily had once dreamed of, comfortable, supported, and filled with the promise of success. Emily's life, on the other hand, was a stark contrast. Her clothes were worn, her hair was often tangled from the long hours at work, and her hands were raw from scrubbing hotel floors. But her resolve never wavered. She knew the path ahead wouldn't be easy, but if she had to clean every hotel room in town to get into a university, she would do it. One day, after months of applications, interviews, and waiting, Emily finally received the call. Her scholarship was approved. The first step toward her future had been secured. It wasn't much, but it was a start. She was accepted into community college, and from there, she would transfer to a 4-year university. It wasn't the glamorous start that Sophia had gotten, but it was hers. She had earned it, and with every passing day, as she mopped hotel floors and tutored students, she became one step closer to her ultimate goal. No one knew the battles she fought in silence. They only saw her quiet determination, her resilience, and the unwavering belief that one day her success would be undeniable. Emily wasn't going to wait for anyone to hand her anything. She would build her future herself, and no one, least of all her mother, could take that from her. Emily's world had shrunk to a small, quiet space. There were no family dinners filled with laughter or light-hearted conversations. Instead, she spent most of her time alone, at her cramped apartment or in the library, surrounded by books and the hum of fluorescent lights. Her parents never asked about her studies. It wasn't that they didn't care, they just never acknowledged the struggle. Her mom, always so proud of Sophia, never seemed to find the time to ask Emily about her future. Instead, there were endless updates about Sophia's college life. Sophia's doing so well in her pre-med classes. She's already on track to graduate with honors. Meanwhile, Emily was left in the background, quiet, unnoticed. Even her sister, whom Emily had once looked up to, seemed to fade into the distance. Every once in a while, Emily would see a photo of Sophia on social media, smiling with friends, standing beside her professors, all wrapped up in the life her parents praised. But when Emily reached out, sending text or commenting on posts, the replies were short, distant. A few words here and there, no effort to engage. The isolation was suffocating. Her phone rarely buzzed with messages of support or encouragement. Instead, the only messages she got were passive-aggressive comments from her mom. "How's that job of yours? Still cleaning hotel rooms? Hope you're learning something useful there." Or, "I'm sure you're doing fine. Just don't get too used to that lifestyle. Sophia is going to change the world." Even the milestones in her life, things that should have been celebrated, passed by without a word. Emily's graduation date came and went without fanfare. She didn't expect an extravagant celebration, but she'd hoped for at least a text, maybe a phone call. Instead, it was as if it didn't matter to anyone. Not her parents, not Sophia, but Emily kept pushing forward in the way that only she could. The lonely nights became a routine. She'd get home after a long shift, heat up a cup of ramen, and sit at her desk, textbooks scattered across the small space. She would study, her fingers cramping from hours of typing and writing. She barely slept, sometimes working through the night, but her resolve never faltered. The ramen meals, the exhaustion, the isolation, they became a background hum in her life, a constant reminder that the only person who believed in her was herself. The professors, however, began to notice her brilliance. In every class, Emily poured herself into her work. No matter the subject, her answers were always thoughtful, well-researched, and articulate. Her professors had no idea what it took to get her there. The late nights spent alone, the exhaustion, the sacrifice, but they saw her potential. They saw the quiet, humble brilliance that shone through every project she submitted. "Emily, this is exceptional work," one of her professors said after reading an essay on a particularly challenging subject. "You've got a real knack for this. Have you considered continuing your studies?" Her heart swelled with pride. It wasn't just about the grade, it was the acknowledgement. For the first time in a long while, someone had noticed her. Someone who wasn't family or a friend. Someone who didn't know her anything. And that felt better than anything she could have imagined. Despite the isolation, Emily had found a kind of strength within herself. No matter how much the world tried to push her down, she was still standing, still succeeding. And as she kept working, one day at a time, she knew her time was coming. She just had to keep going. The email hit her inbox on a quiet, otherwise ordinary evening. Emily opened it without expecting much. After all, she'd applied to several universities, but the idea of being accepted to a top-tier school felt like a far-off dream. But as she read the subject line, her breath caught in her throat. "Congratulations, you've been accepted to university name." Her hands trembled as she clicked the email open. The words on the screen didn't seem real at first. She read them again, accepted, and her heart soared. The weight of everything she'd been through in the past few years, the isolation, the loneliness, the countless hours of study, all suddenly felt worth it. She had made it. But Emily didn't share the news with anyone. Not her mom, not her sister, not anyone. This was hers, her victory, her breakthrough. She had spent years feeling like an outsider in her own family. Now, she didn't need their validation. She was done with trying to earn their approval. She would walk this path alone as she always had. She accepted the offer in silence, packed her things, and moved to the city for the fall semester. The first day on campus was overwhelming. There were so many new faces, so many new opportunities, and yet Emily felt at home. The weight of her past life seemed to lift with each step. She wasn't the girl cleaning hotel rooms anymore. She wasn't the one dismissed and ignored. No, she was now a student at one of the best universities in the country. Classes were demanding, but Emily thrived. She threw herself into her studies with the same focus and determination that had gotten her this far. She was no longer struggling to meet the bare minimum. She was excelling. Her professors noticed her work, not just her grades, but her insights, her drive, her passion for learning. For the first time in her life, she was seen for who she truly was, someone capable of greatness. Beyond the classroom, Emily found herself forming real connections. She made friends, true friends, who weren't tied to her family's expectations or preconceived notions. They saw her as she was, and they valued her for it. The bonds she formed with these new people were deeper than anything she had experienced before. She wasn't just someone to be pitted or brushed aside. She was a peer, a leader, someone who had earned their place. It didn't take long before Emily became involved in student leadership. She was elected to represent her class, and before long, she found herself organizing events, advocating for her peers, and speaking up for causes she cared about. People started coming to her for advice, for guidance. She had found a voice she didn't even know she had. She had become someone she had always hoped to be, no longer defined by her family's expectations, no longer tied to the role they'd given her. She was no longer the girl who cleans hotel rooms, or the one who's not college material. She was Emily, the student leader, the one who rose against all odds. As she looked around campus, surrounded by her new friends and mentors, she realized that she had done it. She had carved her own path. She had proved that she was worthy, not because someone else said so, but because she had chosen to be. And in that moment, Emily knew she had found the place where she truly belonged. The days were flying by, and Emily could feel the excitement building. Graduation was just around the corner, a symbol of everything she had worked for. Her triumph, her independence, her journey. She'd done it all on her own. Now, the moment to celebrate was finally coming. She went online and ordered a custom cap for her graduation day. It was simple, elegant, and spoke volumes. The lettering on it read self-made, the words etched in bold, proud script. It wasn't just a decoration, it was a declaration of who she had become. While other students rushed around making last-minute preparations, Emily took her time. She walked through the quiet apartment she'd rented for the last 2 years. It had been a small, modest space, but it had felt like a palace compared to the cramped rooms she'd grown up in. It was hers, her sanctuary. After deciding on the final touches for her outfit, she sat down at her desk and began to address the invitations. She had made a list of the people who had helped her along the way, professors who had challenged her, friends who had been there when things got tough, even the co-workers who had encouraged her during late-night shifts. These were the people who had truly been part of her journey. They deserved to be there with her, to see her walk across that stage and claim what was rightfully hers. But when it came to her family, Emily hesitated. Her mother had barely acknowledged her achievements. Her sister hadn't even spoken to her in months. The bitter texts from her sister had already started pouring in. "You're just too good for us now. You're graduating and acting like you're better than us." Emily didn't bother replying. She had long stopped trying to explain herself to her sister, who would never understand. Instead, she focused on the people who mattered, the people who had supported her, even if her family never did. She addressed the envelopes for her invitations and sent them off without a second thought. Then, as if on cue, her phone buzzed with a message. It was from her mom. "I heard about your graduation. You didn't invite us? Are we not important to you?" Emily stared at the screen, the words feeling cold and insincere. She had learned over the years that her mother's love came with strings attached. It was always conditional. And now, when the day was almost here, her mother was pretending as if she cared. The anger that had once bubbled up inside her had simmered down, replaced by a calm, collected resolve. She wasn't angry anymore. She was indifferent. She didn't need their approval. She didn't need their pity. Emily was done with trying to prove herself to people who would never truly see her for who she was. With a deep breath, she typed a reply, but it was short and simple. "I've made my decisions. I'm doing this on my own." And with that, she turned off her phone, knowing that she had taken the final step in her transformation. The invitations were already sent, and nothing could change that. She wasn't going to beg for their attention or approval anymore. This moment was hers, and no one could take it away. As the days to graduation grew shorter, Emily felt a sense of peace settle within her. The past was behind her, and the future was waiting. She was ready to claim it. The day had arrived, the moment she had worked tirelessly for, sacrificed so much for. Emily stood backstage, her heart pounding in her chest. She could feel the weight of the gown, but it wasn't heavy with nerves, it was heavy with accomplishment. She had made it. No one could take that from her. The auditorium buzzed with excitement, the air thick with anticipation. As her name was called, Emily stood tall, taking a deep breath before stepping out onto the stage. The applause started immediately, a wave of sound that swept over her. The audience erupted into a standing ovation as she walked across the stage with confidence, each step marking a victory over the doubt and rejection she had faced. Her name echoed in the hall, each syllable a sweet reminder of the journey she had traveled. She smiled, not out of pride, but out of pure gratitude to herself. She had been the one to get herself here. She had been the one to overcome every obstacle, every comment, every rejection. And now, as she took the diploma in her hands, she felt a deep sense of relief, knowing she had achieved something that went far beyond what anyone had expected from her. Cameras flashed all around her as she posed, just briefly for the official photo. The world may have only seen a moment, but for Emily, this moment was years in the making. She was no longer the one who cleans, no longer the one who's not college material. She was a graduate, a force to be reckoned with. When the ceremony ended, the excitement continued to build. She was celebrated by friends, professors, and even a few classmates who had supported her through the years. They congratulated her with sincerity, and it felt good to be seen for the first time in her life. The evening began to wind down, and Emily returned to her apartment, where she let out a long sigh of relief. The weight of the day had left her feeling drained, but in a good way. It was over. She had done it. She was about to sink into the couch when her phone buzzed. At first, she didn't think much of it, another congratulations from a friend or coworker. But then she saw the name flashing on her screen, Mom. Her heart skipped a beat. She hadn't heard from her in weeks, not since the invitations had been sent. The moment she swiped the screen, her mother's tearful voice filled the room. "Emily, I don't know what to say. I never thought you'd really do this. You're so far away from us now. Please just come home. We need you." Her mom's voice trembled, full of emotion, as though this was a turning point she was desperate to fix. But Emily didn't feel that desperation. She had heard this before, an attempt to pull her back into the fold. Her mother's love was always a currency, one she had to earn through obedience and sacrifice. Emily felt a bitter taste in her mouth as she heard the voicemail cut off, only for her phone to buzz again. This time, the number flashing on the screen was her sister's. Emily had almost forgotten what it felt like to hear her voice. "Explain yourself, Emily. How could you do this to us? You're acting like you're above the family. Do you think you're better than me now?" The venom in her sister's words stung, But Emily had long grown immune to the cruelty that had once wounded her so deeply. She didn't owe anyone an explanation. She had fought for her own path, her own success. There was no room in her life for toxic demands anymore. She listened to the voicemail in its entirety, then tapped the screen to delete it without a second thought. The phone rang again, but this time Emily didn't even check. She wasn't interested in the same old drama, the guilt trips or the manipulations. One by one, she deleted every message, letting the voicemails vanish into oblivion, just like the family that had cast her aside. Tonight, she wasn't just a graduate. She was free. Free from the weight of their expectations. Free from the shadows they had cast over her. She was her own person now, stronger, smarter, and ready for the next chapter. As Emily sat back, her phone silent in her hand, she couldn't help but smile. This was just the beginning. Emily leaned back in her chair, staring out the window of her small but cozy apartment. The city was alive, bustling with energy, but to her it felt different. For the first time in her life, she felt like she belonged, like she had finally found her place. It had been months since graduation, and Emily had made the decision to leave her past behind. She wasn't angry anymore. She didn't carry that burning resentment in her chest that once fueled her every action. She had let it go. No, not for them. She had let it go for herself. The bitterness, the hurt, the longing to prove herself to people who would never truly see her for who she was. It was all behind her now. She had spent so many years fighting for validation from people who could never give it to her. Her parents had refused to believe in her. Her sister had always been too busy comparing herself to her, and everyone else had treated her like an afterthought. She had worked night shifts, sacrificed weekends, worked through holidays, and gotten through countless lonely birthdays, all while trying to make something of herself. She had to be tough because no one was there to hold her up. But now, as she sat in this new city, starting grad school, she realized something. All of those years of struggle, those endless hours she had put in, weren't just about getting a degree. They were about building herself. She had learned so much along the way, things that no classroom could teach her. She had built resilience. She had built independence. And most importantly, she had built confidence. The late nights and lonely moments weren't failures. They had forged her into the person she had become. And that person was unstoppable. She had left the old world behind, her old life, and surrounded herself with people who saw her for who she truly was. In this new city, she had found a chosen family. Professors who believed in her, classmates who supported her, and friends who encouraged her. People who didn't just see her as someone trying to prove herself, but as someone who had already succeeded, someone who had already earned her place. Emily took a deep breath, the weight of everything she had been through lifting off her shoulders with each passing day. It wasn't just the degree in her hands that made her proud. It was the fact that she had built something lasting for herself. She had become someone she could look at in the mirror and be proud of. She no longer needed validation from anyone else because she had learned to validate herself. As she closed the chapter on her old life, she couldn't help but think of all the moments that had led her to this point. The time she had spent working to pay for her own tuition, the sacrifices she had made to make sure she could continue on this journey. And though it had been painful, the scars had healed into something beautiful. They were reminders of how far she had come. They were the proof of her strength. She thought back to the harsh words her mother had spoken to her. "You're not studying material. Go clean hotel rooms while your sister becomes a doctor." Those words used to cut deep. But now, they felt like nothing more than the misguided opinions of people who didn't understand her. They were right about one thing, though. She wasn't studying material. She was something better. She was unstoppable. Emily smiled as she stood up and gathered her things. It was time for class. She didn't need anyone's permission or approval to keep going. She had already made it, and no matter what anyone said, no matter what anyone thought of her, she was going to keep rising. Because she had learned one thing through it all. When you decide that you are worthy, nothing and no one can hold you back. As she stepped out the door and into the bustling streets, she felt a sense of peace. The world was hers to conquer, and she was ready. She had come this far. Nothing could stop her now. And as her voice echoed in her mind, she thought they were right. I wasn't studying material. I was something better. I was unstoppable, and she would prove it to the world one step at a time.